All right, hello everyone. Struggle there for a second. Try to get the screen down. Put up Martin Luther. I was at it. Hope everyone's doing well. For those of you tuning in, there we go. All right. So this is a new 10-part series that I'm conducting here, examining the Christian faith. Got some slides to go over, and it should be pretty interesting. We're going to look at the power of ideas today, the driving force behind our behavior and actions, and and how those are constructed, and how they drive our behavior and actions, and we're going to be going over quite a bit different details and how we can keep ourselves from becoming possessed by ideas and rather keep adaptable, I would say, to new information, to integrate new information into our brains and to be able to move through the world and navigate through the world better, more efficiently, effectively, compared to having ideas that end up possessing us and we becoming walking, talking ideologues at the end of the day. Much of what we see on both really the left and right of the political spectrum. So it should be interesting. And then we're going to be going through each stage more in depth. I'm trying to remember the exact schedule here. I've actually been, unfortunately, having a few issues, health issues. So prayers would be appreciated. That's for sure. We're trying to get to the bottom of it, and we haven't really seemed to get there. I've been having issues thinking clearly, memory problems, and been feeling sick with no underlying reason. So we been a little interesting, but this has been going on for the past few months, but really in the past probably month or two, it's increased. So doctors are trying to figure out exactly what's going on. But yeah, we're going to be looking at today the introduction to the power of ideas. And we're going to go over creation and evolution, which will be very interesting. We're going to be looking at the emergence of consciousness. So we'll be looking at Adam and Eve, Garden of Eden scenario. We'll be looking at the flood and tyranny, kind of correlating with this study on the ideas, on the power of ideas. And in the interim of all of these, especially once we get into the Bible, beginning with the creation story and evolution and so on from there, we're going to be really looking at archaeological evidence and other scientific domain evidence that helps support the Bible. So we're not just going to be talking about interpretations and going on, but we're going to actually look at legitimate evidence to support certain interpretations and support the Bible as a whole. And so then we'll be looking at the Exodus and the evidence for that. We'll be looking, and we'll kind of go through the Judges and some of the evidence of Old Testament, go on to the birth of Christ, then the Transfiguration, looking at some ideas of transformation within the Christian life, with our individual life, and then look at the death and resurrection, the apostolic journey, as well as the second coming end time scenario, and evidence that supports all that. So I'm going to attempt to go as deep as I possibly can. Like I said, I've been having some health issues, so it hasn't really helped me much in that regards. It takes me a little longer than usual. Been a little irritating, to say the least, but I do my best today. And I spent quite a bit of time putting together the slideshow and kind of thinking on these ideas and to try to make the most of it. So, Kim, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. You can leave your comment here, like and share, and we'll go on and go from here. Oh, Ashley, thank you for joining as well. I appreciate it. So before we begin, go into a word of prayer. Dear Lord God, Jesus Christ, thank you for the time together. Please bless us, be with us. Fill us, Holy Spirit, Lord, cleanse from our sins and help us to live and please and glorify you in all things, and help us to delve into the study and to think clearly on what's being taught and to integrate it into our current knowledge structure and to be able to see how it fits into our worldview and to be able to see how we could utilize it to ultimately give you glory, Lord, and to touch other people's lives. Help us along this journey. Be with us. In your great, wonderful name, pray, Lord Jesus Christ. Father, amen. So, the Christian faith, and what, the thing that really got me going on this was, well, years of research, of course, and along with my schooling that I'm doing and everything. But the thing that really got me on this was different discussions I have had, actually being one, and Michelle, and some debates I've had over the years, and especially debates here recently, and trying to differentiate that of one thing, New Ageism, New Age ideas, and that of Christianity, and trying to make sense of all this, and to really help people understand what their faith really actually means, and that one thing is not just a blind faith, but it's real, and it's something that you can really, I would say, grasp to a certain extent, and that we need to take it real. We don't need to pretend as though, well, we just believe and everything's all good and we're going to go to heaven, because that's not necessarily the ultimate goal. It's about establishing a relationship with God, maximizing the potential within us, and touching other people's lives, and establishing relationships with them as well, and to make a difference. And that contributes to the whole of society and the whole of the essence of reality, I would say. And so we're going to, well, I think it's going to be a little interesting. Joe, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. Hope all is well overseas there. I know it's going to be a little fairly late over there. So I really do appreciate you taking the time coming on. Okay. So, and again, for those just tuning in, like I said, I've been having a few health issues. So if you would just keep me in your prayers. Just been some interesting things going on. We're trying to get to the bottom of this, and so it's been a little frustrating. But okay, now I've yet to be able to figure out how to make this actually into a slideshow onto the other screen for whatever reason. I'm not the best on tech savvy, but I can utilize it at least on that end. So I'm just going to keep it as is. Examining Christian faith. So, introduction to the power of ideas is this segment, this session today, and I start out with a few quotes here. One from Leo Tolstoy: "Free thinkers are those who are willing to use their minds without prejudice and without fearing to understand things that clash with their own customs, privileges, or beliefs." And then Friedrich Nietzsche, which we'll go over here later on, famous atheist of the 19th century: "All things are subject to interpretation. Whichever interpretation prevails at a given time is a function of power and not truth." So that's where we're going to begin, is the ideas of what constitutes an interpretation, and what constitutes good interpretation compared to faulty interpretation. And so I'm going to be going in depth here, especially on the psychology part of it a little bit. But Carl Jung, for our last quote here: "Every form of addiction is bad, no matter whether the narcotic be alcohol or morphine or idealism." So idealism being that with constructed ideas of constructed ideals within our minds, and then forcing that onto reality and forcing others to adhere to those ideals. We do that in Christianity, but we, to a certain extent, oftentimes in the very dogmatic ways. But they do it as well within various other forms. We see that on the radical leftist side. They have these constructed ideals. They're imposing upon the world. The world has to adhere to those, and whether they like it or not. And so we have to be careful with what ideals are striving towards, and we have to make sure that those ideals are actually accurate interpretations of what constitutes ideals. And I'm going to kind of delve into more of the religious side of Christianity and the spiritual side of Christianity, and have those attempt to bond those together, I would say, because that's really what it's about. We tend to either or extremes, and I'm going to go into that here shortly. And okay, trying to think. Thank you, Ashley. I appreciate it. So, what is interpretation? Interpreting, the actual definition from Webster's dictionary, to explain or tell the meaning of, present in an understandable way. And of course, sometimes that's very difficult depending on what exactly you're presenting. I know people are like, well, if you understand it well enough, you can present it easy enough for a child to understand. And well, as I say, oftentimes it depends on what level of analysis you're talking about. It's very difficult to teach a child quantum physics. You can kind of get a little bit out, but I think it was Richard Feynman. He said something of like, well, if I could teach it in simple terms, I'd be out of a job or something of that sort of, the famous physicist. So there's things that are so in depth that it's very difficult to present in an understandable way. And, rightfully so, depending on what level of analysis and what topic subject you're seeking to interpret and to present. But the actual, so we go on to the definition of interpretation itself, a particular adaptation or version of a work, method, or style. A teaching technique that combines factual with stimulating explanatory information. Key there is factual, as well as an adaptation. Because interpretations, I would say, change. And we're going to go over that in relationship to Christianity. The living word, adaptable, living, it's alive. So we have, speaking of facts, so you have data. You have objective data and you have subjective data. Objective data are done through observations. We have that of facts, of course, and you have things that are done through experimentation. And you come up with empirical data, objective data, and then you can make proper conclusions. Okay, this is true. This is factual. It's been observed. It's been tested. It's come out like this. So this is true. This is a fact. And so atheists, their observations, evolutionary theory, Big Bang. Of course, we'll go over that next week. How that actually maps on beautifully with Scripture, and there's a lot of factual information within those, and but they see it without an intelligent design, of course. But I'll go on to show how that's not I would say not following logic very well. So fundamental Christians see it as 6 days of creation created by God. So these are what we observe. This is facts to them. This is the objective data. And they adhere to that. And that's strictly what it is. And there's no, it's rigid and there's no outside, there's no adaptability within that oftentimes. And so subjective data is generally that of experience, personal interpretation, and emotions. Atheists, they don't experience God. I don't have any personal experience with God, therefore God is not real, cannot see him. And of course, fundamental Christians are like, well, I experience the Holy Spirit, and worship music, and I see his work in life. But those are more subjective. It's not very factual. It's very difficult to make it into a tangible type evidence to say, well, yeah, that's actually true, because there's other things it could actually be. I mean, when people say they experience the Holy Spirit in music, sometimes it's like, well, people say the same thing at a rock concert. So it's very difficult to determine. Those are subjective experiences. They're not less important or essential, I would say. They're just not as tangible, something that could be utilized, especially presented out into the world, especially in a formal debate, that's for sure. I generally don't recommend, nor do I use myself, subjective experience with whenever I'm in a debate with, let's say, an atheist or new ageist or any of those kind of things. Generally, I'm trying to use empirical data for the most part, the best that I can, and it has its own own limitations, and everything has limitations. That's why adaptability is so essential. the spirit itself represents adaptability that we'll go over. So it's very interesting. And Joe said moral imperatives are key to interpretation. So AI comes up with so many nihilistic material, hope, and moral principle. Yeah, no, I absolutely the especially on the moral side, that's for sure. You have to have something fundamental that's driving your behavior. And we have different things. We'll get on to that here shortly. That drives our behavior. Yeah, we constitute as ideals, morals, and as I tell anybody, you have to be careful what that what those are exactly. Because oftentimes people go based off subjective experience whenever they form ideals, their emotions, their own experiences. Well, I experienced this, therefore, and it seemed to work okay for me. It's like, well, that doesn't mean it works for everybody. And you don't know if that's going to actually work in the long term either. These are, especially when you're doing something as fundamental and important as morality. We toss it around like it's nothing nowadays, but it's like that upholds society. That upholds the individual, but it upholds society, that the individual makes up. And if there's no moral underpinning, then everyone's doing everything that they want to do predicated upon how they feel for that day. And nothing works in unison whatsoever. Now, it can become too tyrannical, and I'll go into that later on. It can become too tyrannical where we have too strict of rules, too much morality. And the Roman Catholic Church was a prime example of that. And it becomes too constrictive and ends up smothering society. And there's no progress whatsoever. But it's such a fine balance. It's the same. That didn't, like I said, that doesn't just go for society as a whole, but that also goes for the individual. Each individual is having this adaptable, and I think that's what Christ is getting at whenever he's talking about living and walking. Well, Paul talking about living and walking in the Spirit, and it's the constant adaptability and trying, because it's so complex, and we're complex creatures, and reality is complex, and we appear to some degree to cause reality to manifest itself. So this is a very complex thing that we're dealing with, and we are all connected to one another on the subatomic level. That's for sure, through quantum entanglement. So there's all these connections, and we're all feeding off each other, and if we're all doing what we want, then there's no adhesive progress, I would say, at the end of the day. And so, anyways, well. Let me try to get back in. Hey, Alan, thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it. So, traditionalism and progressivism. So you have traditionalism, the adherence to the doctrines or practices of a tradition, the beliefs of those opposed to modernism, liberalism, or radicalism. And then you have progressivism, the principles, beliefs, or practices of progressives, making use of or interested in new ideas, findings, or opportunity. Both are necessary. I would like to say that right off the bat. Both are necessary. You can't do one without the other. You need both. And but if it leans over to one or the other, then that's when society begins to crumble. And that's what we're seeing on the progressive side. Things are becoming too progressive. And then, of course, then you have to ask the question, well, what do you mean by progressive exactly? That's what I like to ask some of these radical leftists. It's like, is that progress, or is that just rooted in feelings of nihilism? It's you have to, progress is something empirical that you can integrate into tradition that will enhance the overall quality and perception, I would say, of the individual and society as a whole. And so whenever you say, well, these people can just choose whatever gender they want, it's like, well, is it true? It's like, well, no, it's not empirically true whatsoever, first off. And then at the same time, can it be integrated in tradition in a way that enhances the overall quality and perception of the individual and society? It's like, no, not at all. It actually causes more confusion. So not only is it not true, it's like factually true. It's at the same time, it's you're integrating too much chaos. It's like, that's not progress. It's just chaos. That's all that is. It's just chaos. It's not progress. Progress is something that can be integrated that enhances the overall quality and well-being of all people, and it causes greater progression towards, just greater overall progress in society. Adhesive, uh, co, cohesion among each other, and so content is key to it all. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, Joe. And of course, our conscious, yeah, it's very interesting because I really thought about the conscious as well, because our conscious to a certain degree is adaptable. And of course, I'll be getting off into something entirely different than, I don't want to prolong this necessarily, but it's an interesting thing. I thought about how our conscious to a certain degree is adaptable in and of itself. And I've noticed that conscious oftentimes will present a couple of different scenarios to us, almost symbolic of that of the Garden of Eden. A couple of different choices in which you can utilize. It's a very complex thing with conscious thing. Conscious could be something that's influenced socially to a certain degree as well as biologically. And I think obviously there's, especially in the Christian doctrine, theologically speaking, there is some influence by the Holy Spirit, but I don't think it's solely that. I think it's also something working biologically, something that was socially inherited within us. And I think that's why, to a certain degree, we also wrestle with our conscious as we progress through life, because there are some things within our conscious that condemns us, that aren't necessarily, I would say, not an accurate representation of condemnation in the first place. And so it's something that needs to, and that's where research and seeking out knowledge is so essential, and having that relationship with God, and you're constantly, and I love Jordan Peterson puts it so well, wrestling with God, that using the parallel of that, the story of Jacob, we're constantly wrestling with God. We're wrestling with reality. We're wrestling with our conscious. I mean, this is all tied in together, and it really truly is. And scientifically, I actually recently had a couple of debates with atheists on this very topic of reality at a subatomic level and the conscious awareness of reality. And they were trying to get me. And no, we don't know that particles are aware, and that's kind of being outdated. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's actually not at all. There's a wealth of data on it, and I mean, in the double slit experiment, whenever particles being shot through the double slits, they had a camera, and it would turn into particle, which I'll get into later on. I know this is kind of going off topic, but had the camera, and it would film, and the particles knew they were being filmed, and would be particles. Wave, you can do research stuff on this, but the wave function collapses into a particle. That is reality itself. And then they tried to trick the particles as they shot this out of their little gun, and they unplugged the camera but kept the camera there, so it wouldn't know that it was being observed, if they thought. And then it knew that it wasn't being observed through the camera, so it remained a wave function. It did not collapse into reality. That is, the conscious observer, the consciousness of human beings is that which creates reality. And it's so bizarre. And so they were trying to say otherwise. I'm like, no, here. And they finally were like, oh, okay. And then left the conversation. It's like, yeah, man, this crazy stuff. This universe appears conscious. And it's literally created for conscious beings to inhabit it, to activate it into existence. And so when you think about that, it's like, wow, I mean, that is in and of itself evidence for, at least a higher power that created, higher intelligence, higher consciousness that created this universe, which we'll get into here later on. Of course, the New Ages are like, oh, well, yeah, see, that's true. It is a higher power. And then I have to narrow it down even more. And we'll go into that here shortly of the right and left hemisphere of our brains and how that works. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to get off track there a little bit, but yes, that's where the work is done. Wrestling God in our own conscious. It's where the rubber meets. Absolutely, Joe. That's for sure. So, interpretation. Christ debated the traditionalists and progressive of his day. The traditionalists being that of Pharisees, and progressives being that of Sadducees. It's very interesting. And so I got onto this years ago, and it really struck me as odd that he was right in the middle. And I was like, well, the middle, why? So he's right there, and it's always adaptable. He's always having to adapt to questions that they present to him. So that was very fascinating in and of itself as well. And so and when we contend with reality, contend with ourselves, contend with others, everything, we're always having to adapt. So there can't be just this systematized order, framework in which we are completely driven off of. There can be an underlying substructure, I would say, that guides us, that's for sure. And that would be the word of God and things of that nature, the belief, these ideas but it needs to somewhat be adaptable depending on what manifests itself before us, what comes our way, in order to know how to deal with certain circumstances. That goes based into the idea of intuition. And so it's we'll get into that here in a second. It says, then the scribes and the Pharisees who were from Jerusalem came to Jesus saying, why do your disciples transgress the traditions of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat bread. He answered and said to them, why do you also transgress the commandment of God because of your tradition? For God commanded, saying, honor your father and your mother, and he who curses father or mother, let him be put to death. But you say, whoever says to his father or mother, whatever profit you might have received from me as the gift of God, to God, then he need not honor his father or his mother. Thus you have made the commandment of God of no effect by your tradition. Hypocrites. Well did Isaiah prophesy about you, saying, these people draw near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. And in vain they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. When he had called the multitude to himself, he said to them, hear and understand. Not what goes into the mouth defiles a man, but what comes out of the mouth, this defiles a man. So I'm going to go into that here in a minute on that idea. So then his disciples came and said to him, do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard the saying? Wow, we hear that all the time now. Offended. Everybody's offended by everything. And I'm not even kidding you. I have discussions and debates with all sorts of different people, and I have over the years. And it doesn't matter whether on the right or the left. I mean, everybody's offended by everything now. And they call the millennials and Generation Z snowflakes, and you're correct, that's for sure. But I feel like everybody's almost snowflake nowadays. God bless them all for sure, because it's just, man, how can you be that offended? But what it is you're offending the structure that they have housed within in their minds, that they're living off of. And whenever you penetrate that with new information, it's a certain it's derogatory, and so it's an offense. You offended and you penetrated that framework in which they live and have their mode of being. And so that disrupts everything. And then you begin to question everything. And I'll go into that here shortly. I mean, it can be catastrophic sometimes that's why a lot of times Christians do have a hard time with atheists. Atheists are very brutal too. I mean, they come in, a lot of them are low in trade agreeableness, first off. And so they're very headstrong. They come in, they present all these ideas, and it starts conflicting with the interpretations that they have within. A lot of it is interpretation. It's not necessarily the word of God in and of itself, but the interpretation thereof within the word that they have formulated in their head. And then all of a sudden, some of these Christians literally just completely lose it because, now I'm convinced that, man, maybe God really isn't real. The Bible's not real. Nothing's real. And I just give up. There was actually, I remember seeing a case of that about 3 or 4 years ago. May have been even longer than that. There was a prominent worship singer guy over in England that renounced his faith because he read The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. One book did him in. That was it. Now, if and I like to tell anyone this, it's okay to read those things for sure. I love reading opposing works. I want to see what the other side has to say. But then I go back to my own side and then seek to try to formulate and see how that either integrates or maybe it's conflicting. Why is it conflicting? All these different things. And I analyze it. It takes a lot of work, that's for sure. But that's what I've done over the years. I think that's why sometimes my arguments are pretty powerful, because I have spent a lot of time arguing with myself and offending myself, I would say. If you offend yourself, then overall you get tougher and you end up not being so offended by everybody else, because it's like, well, I've already done that. And, and it represents what I'll get into here shortly with the dual hemispheres. Work of Iain Mcgilchrist is coming into the right hemisphere, going into the left, and then going back to the right. Oftentimes, though, people take it into the right, put it into the left, and then the work's done. And it's like, well, you're only seeing part of the picture. You're not seeing the whole of the convex now. It's a constant wrestling back and forth, and you're always having to formulate and adapt to new ideas and new ways of thinking. Otherwise, you become stagnant and it collapses upon itself. That kind of represents the idea of the Tower of Babel. It builds up this tyranny that ends up collapsing upon itself. It's symbolic representation, not the actual event itself, but it's symbolic representation. It's like you built a structure, you have this structure, this framework, and then it becomes so tyrannical and becomes so solidified that it finally just collapses upon itself. And so it can go the other way too. If you have too much progress, quote unquote progress, too many new ideas, it can ultimately have no foundation whatsoever. So this represents the ideas Christ is talking about, building the house on the sand that just collapses. And so you have to have some stability and adaptability together in and of itself. Otherwise, at the end of the day, you have nothing, either or. So, but anyways, so it says, offended when they heard the saying. He said, but he answered and said, every plant which my heavenly Father has not planted will be uprooted. Let them alone. They are blind leaders of the blind. And if the blind leads the blind, both will fall into a ditch. Then Peter answered and said to him, explain this parable to us. So Jesus said, are you also without understanding? Do you not yet understand that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and is eliminated? But those things which proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and they defile a man. For out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. These are the things which defile a man, but to eat with unwashed hands does not defile a man. So there's a few things to go over here. Let me see where we're at. So tradition in the Greek is, and I'm probably going to pronounce this incorrectly, but paradosis. It may be paradoses, I think. A giving over which is done by word of mouth or in writing, tradition by instruction, narrative, precept. Objectively, that which delivered the substance of a teaching. So traditions you have, and we have a bunch of traditions in the church. Just think about it. I've lived outside of time or something. I can't. Oh yeah, absolutely, Alan, 100%. Living outside time, space, time itself. It's where God exists, and that's and that's what I'm going to get at next week with the idea of the creation. You have to look at things from the perspective of where it's actually speaking from. So that's for next week. Okay. But we have a lot of traditions, a lot of interpretations. I'll go ahead and blow this up and then I'll go back to the deal. But we have a lot of interpretations within the Christian church, and a lot of them are very good, that's for sure. But they're not all correct, and that's one of the big things for me on the high-end conservative end of the spectrum within the Christian church is that, these interpretations, and actually a prime example, right quick, was I watched a video of Ken Ham, and he was talking about how people like Francis Collins, who is ahead of the Genome Project, he's a brilliant scientist on DNA, and he along with somebody else, I can't remember exactly who it was, we're talking about creation, evolution, and how they actually go together and all these different things. And he was condemning them, as well as people like William Lane Craig and Frank Turek and all these Christian apologists, because they accept evolution, and that contradicts the word of God, and that they're going outside the Bible to find their information. That is an extreme form of traditionalism. And it can make one so stagnant to where, whenever you say you're going outside the Bible to find information, well, what do you mean by that exactly? We need to be integrating everything. It's the Bible is not the only thing that we have as a resource. Even God stated that the things of God are those which encompass the whole of reality. That's one part, and it's an important part for sure. But we need to be taking things from outside that found within science and stuff, and then correlating, because science, the study of science, is the study of the workings of the universe. Now, there can be dogmatic types, like those who kind of have a follow scientism, that adhere solely to science, and they're wrong in them. They're traditionalists in their own ways, But we need to be integrating, and the work that I've done over the years, that I've been doing for the past 15 or so years, is trying to understand, because I've always appreciated science. I've always liked learning about physics and different things of that nature. And I was like, man, maybe they go together, And as I kept delving into it, I found that they were complementing each other on so many different levels. I was like, wow, this is quite interesting. But if God created everything and the workings of the universe, of course, that's going to correlate with the Bible. And so we need to be bringing that in. Otherwise, we become too stagnant. And so, and if you're going to take it those extremes, then you might as well take it to its fullest extent. The technology that Ken Ham was using to produce this video, he shouldn't even be using that, because it's outside the Bible. That's technology, that's progress that was constructed by people that were doing things outside the Bible. Technology that was formulated that had nothing to do with Christianity whatsoever, for the most part. It's like, then he should not be using that. It's like to sit there and say that you're going to condemn people for trying to integrate knowledge of the working universe into the Bible, and then yet using technology that was done from people within that very same field is contradictory. It's like, that doesn't make any sense at all. It's for me, it's just crazy. I'm like, okay. And so to state that what he's talking about is not, oh well, they're going outside the Bible. What he's meaning is that it contradicts his personal interpretation of Scripture. That's what he means. Not that it contradicts the Bible. It contradicts the interpretation thereof. And these are traditions. And this is what Christ was going against in his day. And so that's my thing, is that Christ was we're dealing with a lot of the same thing, whether it be on the conservative side or the progressive side. It's like, you guys are correct, but wrong at the same time. And I'm not saying I'm correct. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we need to be working together to figure this out and progress as a community together, trying to figure and fit all this together. And I would say people like William Lane Craig and Frank Turek and Francis Collin are true progressives of our day. They actually take true factual knowledge that we have from the workings of science and integrate it with the Bible. That's true progress, not like some of these other people that just want to have it their way, the transgenders and lesbian, gay, trans, all that stuff. That you can do whatever you want and construe the word all you want, but I've looked at all the arguments, and yeah, that's not progress. It's just chaos, and based off of subjective experiences, not objective data. And so, yeah, exactly. It contradicts their traditional interpretation of the Bible, and so. And, I'm not harping. I'm just saying we need to be working together on this. And this is what, these are the ideas that I'm presenting, understanding the Christian faith at a different level. And let's look at this and let's really see what the word's saying. And this is a really fascinating part for me is that, people like Ken Ham and stuff will sit there and talk about literalism, and how the Bible is, literal. And, it's literally 6 days within Genesis. Well, the first off, doesn't make any sense, because if it's literal 24-hour days, then why was the sun created on the fourth day? Sun wasn't even around, so there were no 24-hour days. And I'll go into this a little deeper later on next week on the creation session. But then you look at statements of Christ where he says that if you had enough faith, you'd be able to say this mountain move from here to there. Implying the idea of telekinesis. And yet, if you were to tell them that, they're like, no, that's a metaphor. Actually, it's not a metaphor. And why is it this metaphor in that situation, but not a metaphor over in Genesis? And see, you're picking and choosing where it means metaphor according to your own thought and what makes you comfortable. That's what it is. But if you actually look at what Christ was talking about moving mountain, he was pointing at the exact mountain that he was just transfigured on. So, I mean, he's using a literal projection of you'll be able to say this mountain moved from here to there, implying the idea of telekinesis, going along with his miraculous works that he was saying the apostles would be able to do, as well as us, which is interesting because a lot of the Christian church knows, like, oh yeah, miracles stop whenever the apostles. Where does it say that? It doesn't say that anywhere, nor does it imply that in Scripture, not one place. But somehow we're not able to do the same miracles. I'm like, I think because we lost a lot of weight, we became so dogmatic in our understanding of the word that we're not able to tap into that potential. I could be wrong, that's for sure. I'm not saying that I'm right. I'm just saying that from what I've analyzed, I'm like, we should be doing a lot greater works. And that goes even for me as an individual, and trying to understand that and being transformed, the ideas of transformation, what that means exactly. And I think it's a lot deeper than what we're taking it. But I mean, it's just amazing how you'll say it's literal here, but then you won't say it's literal here. And then the same thing with Revelation. It's not like you're saying it's literal dragon, literal, it's like, well, obviously those are, symbolism, metaphors. That's what they're using. It's not the horned beast man that's coming out and deceiving the world. It's more than likely representing something. The image of the beast is representing something. And so, and that's the ideas of hermeneutics and being able to interpret according to the language. But there's multiple levels of analysis, as I've said before in some of my videos. You got to interpret it according to its original language. Then you have to interpret it in correlation with our modern understanding as well, I believe, because as we've improved in technology, it's like if God has given us certain things in the text and it's a living word, then it's going to present new, fresh ideas as we progress as human beings, as a species. We progress in technology and we progress in knowledge. It's going to highlight itself even more. It's going to present new data to us. It's going to present new things because it's living and it's adaptable. And it literally was given to us from upon high. So that's where the knowledge itself resides. And so it's going to speak volumes more so than it did to people 100 years ago. It should continuously get richer and richer, not just to make us feel good like at church does oftentimes in our modern day, that we should constantly get this stimulated effect and, a boost of dopamine to be able to go on for the week before we go back to church again. And most of the stuff that I see, and I'm not trying to get on, I'm not trying to be derogatory, I would say, to the modern day church necessarily, but it is something that I think is very important to address. And from what I've seen, a lot of it is just very above the water. And I've went to multiple churches here, even locally. And it's just, everything is always to make you feel good. And I'm like, no, that's not what it's about. That's not the way the Christian church was designed. It was also designed to delve and get deep and to discuss with one another, dialogue with each other. And every time you try to dialogue with people, it's like, oh, well, you're going outside the Bible. And it's like, no. It's an interpretation you're basing off a tradition. And I'm just presenting new information that actually maps on rather well if you'll just listen for a second. I could be wrong. I don't know. But here's what I can see. And then you do that and, and you're going to have some people that are going to listen, some that aren't, this for sure. But anyway, so and Joe says, great, how many cosmologists now believe in a precisely created universe? They reconcile with those rigid traditional. Yeah, exactly. That's a lot of problem too. What's interesting, that's funny you pointed out, Joe, is that there's a lot of cosmologists, a lot of you see a lot of astrophysicists and different things that they're seeing the workings of the universe, and they're seeing somewhat of an intelligent design. There's even a lot of them that actually aren't necessarily atheists. They're more New Age centric. They're like, well, it's a higher power. And at least you're kind of getting on the right track now. But I'll show as we go along in these studies over the next several weeks how I'm going to narrow it down to how New Ageism just doesn't work itself out. It's too, in the terms of what we're talking about today, too progressive. It's too vague. It's not narrow, and there's not enough evidence to even support it. You have to go towards, and what's interesting is New Ageism is actually emerges from Buddhism. So then you get to the root of what it is that you're looking at to better understand this. Okay, well, Buddhism, then you break that apart and it's like, well, there's some truth to it, but overall, it doesn't contain the whole truth. And it doesn't even have enough empirical evidence to support it compared to Christianity. So if I were to say that there was a higher power, then I would need to look at all the religions of the world, because you would think, well, that higher power is intelligent, it's conscious, and it's created a sociable creature. So it's going to be more than likely sociable with us. It's going to have that, look up at the word now. I'm trying to find the word I'm actually looking for, but sociable will do for now. And that it would more than likely communicate with us. I mean, we even communicate with reality in order for it to manifest itself. So God more than likely created all this higher power. Let's use that for a second. And talking to New Ages is like, then you have to narrow that scope down to what you mean exactly. Get precise in what you mean by belief. I believe in a higher power. What do you mean by that exactly? Well, and it's like, then I've had these talks, these discussions with these New Ages. It's like, once you get down to the precision part, then they get befuddled, because they're like, well, I don't know. It's like, no. What you mean is that you want it to be that way. And oftentimes what they're actually talking about is exactly what Christ taught. I'm like, look, Christ is telling you exactly what you're talking about. He's saying the exact same thing. What most of these atheists and New Ages and stuff have problems with is the dogmatization of Christianity, what it's become as a religion. And I get it. I understand that. I get your frustration. Friedrich Nietzsche was a stark critic of not Christianity, but dogmatic Christianity. That's what it was more than anything else. I get what they're saying. I understand the frustration of it. But my thing is don't go the opposite end. Don't go, well, I'm frustrated with this, so I'm going to go ahead and go completely to the other side. It's like, you're doing yourself injustice, and you're doing those around you injustice. You need to go, okay, maybe they're right here, and then go on and start assessing the information of what's truly in the text itself. Extract the dogmatic, extract the religious aspect, I would say, of Christianity for a second, just for a second, and look at what is being taught by Christ and the apostles. And when you start doing that, you're like, wait a minute here. They're not teaching the exact same thing that, the Catholic Church and the different religious institutions have been teaching us all this time. They're teaching something, actually more relational, I would say, to God himself and to Christ. And it's going to be interesting as I go on with it, because these are ideas I've been having, especially with why Christ exactly. And, because oftentimes when people do get really in depth, they're like, well, I think Christ is just telling us, one thing, either, well, he's just a good philosopher, he's teaching us good things, or he was teaching us just how to get free from the matrix or whatever it is. It's like, I agree with you a little bit there. It's like he was teaching us how to transform and ascend to new levels in our life. But there's still something to Christ himself. And I believe he is the Son of God. And I think there's a good reason for it. I think one thing, is a personification of God himself, I would say, in the flesh. And I was like, why is it that we would need Christ? And this will go into the work here shortly. Then I know I'm kind of getting off track here, but the left and right hemisphere, the right hemisphere being that of intuition and the whole of context, the whole of reality, while the left hemisphere is about precision. The spiritual aspect of God is the connection with him and living and walking in the spirit. But you need something more structural as well as human beings to be able to really work off of, something that you home in on that guides you. And I believe the reason it's Christ, I would say, is because it's something for us to be precise at and to guide us to where we need to go. Because as I've told some of these New Ages, it's the fact that, well, if you're going based off, which most of it is actually based off subjective experience. One guy I was talking to in particular, pretty smart guy, he was talking about how, well, I was using psychedelics and, I was one with the universe. And I was like, well, how do you know that exactly? I mean, really, how do you actually know that? I mean, I'm not condemning, but how do you know that empirically, that you were one with the universe? Are you sure that wasn't just a neurological construct that happened within your brain and had you perceive it as such? And then you start, like I said, you get precise in your belief on what you mean exactly. And then, well, I don't know. And the problem is when we do the New Age deal, and it's just about spirituality, is that Well, if you're going based off that, then the chances of you in you're going to acknowledge first off that there are malevolent and benevolent forces within that spiritual realm, because you're getting into the New Age aspect. So you know those are both there. It's like, then what keeps you from encountering malevolent spirits? What keeps you from not becoming, I would say, quote unquote, possessed to a certain degree by malevolent forces? Something that's going to pretend and just like the Antichrist is supposed to be, pretend to be something that's wonderful and magnificent and God itself, and guide you in the wrong manner. Christ was set there for us to focus. Now, this is just an idea. I'm not saying that it's factual, but that Christ was set there so we have something to focus on to guide us to where we actually need to be, the true source of reality itself. That is Christ. That is the Father and Holy Spirit. And so, that way you live and walk in the Spirit, but you also have something that you have a precise aim at, because we're aiming creatures. We need something to aim at. And so that aim, that goal is Christ himself. As long as we keep focused on him, he's going to keep guiding us, spiritually speaking, towards where we need to go and find what it is that we're looking for. And ultimately, that's all found in him, of course, the creator and controller of all things. But so it's something, these are ideas I've been working on for a long time, trying to understand and doing a bunch of research in science and neuroscience. And, I'm in school for psychology, and I'm trying to understand all the best I possibly can. Ultimately, not for my own benefit, but for other people to help. Because I have people ask me tough questions. I love tough questions because it makes me think. It makes me analyze and go, well, maybe that's right. Okay, let's look at it, but let's look at it at both angles, not just one. And then, let's kind of move that around and look at it in different, different perspectives, different degrees of perception, I would say. And then we can kind of make a wholesome conclusion. Oftentimes, though, people are taking things out of context rather than looking at it as a whole. And so, rambled on enough here. So let's go on. It says, correctly interpreting the Hebrew, Yom and Genesis help clear things up for me. It doesn't just mean day. Yes, exactly. You're exactly right, Joe. Yeah, that's where a lot of people get confused on Genesis 1. Oh, well, the Hebrew word Yom, it means day. No, actually, it has a bunch of different meanings. And Ken Ham himself said, oh, yeah, no, it's literal day, Like, no, it's not. It's actually used multiple times means daily, continuous, all kinds of different things. It can mean age, just like you said, geological age itself. And so, Dr. Gerald, I pronounce it, I know I'm pronouncing his name incorrectly. God rest his soul, but Schroeder, I believe is how you pronounce it. He got his degree from MIT. Brilliant man, wrote the Science of God book and a few others. He got his physics degree in MIT, and he was a believer to a certain extent. And he breaks it down with that same thing and maps on evolutionary theory onto that. And that's, where I get a lot of that idea from. It's beautifully laid out. Here recently, I was doing some more research on evolutionary theory and mapping some more crucial aspects onto Genesis 2 found within it. It's remarkable. And so, and even that in and of itself is predicated upon interpretation as well. You can interpret and say, well, it's natural selection, sexual selection. And I believe that all true, but I still believe there's an underpinning mechanism that is moving through this, which is spiritual realm. And as I said before, you can see that you'd have to see it in the whole of the context, which, okay, you know what? I'm just going to keep going with the deal. So that way we can really pinpoint what I'm talking about exactly. And, oh man, I've already got an hour underway. I appreciate you guys staying on and listening. I really do appreciate it. If you have any question or anything, time in like Joe has been doing and put some things out there. I appreciate it. So, okay, we'll look at adaptability. Adaptability. For the word of God is living and powerful and sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing even to the division of soul and spirit and joints and marrow, and is the discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. So, interesting thing, first off, with that idea. So I'm going to do my best here. The Greek word epithemia, which means, oh no, that's not even the right one. See, I'm already messing up here. Hang on. That was the other one. Zio is the Greek word for living. It means to be alive, to breathe. It's a living thing. When you talk about living things, it means that it's adaptable. And I believe it's adaptable, as I said before, it's adaptable to the current knowledge of us human beings. I believe the word was given to us so as we progressed as a species and our knowledge and understanding of the working of the universe, we would be able to ultimately integrate that into our understanding of the Bible, because the Bible was, given to us to a certain degree from God Himself, and through the writings of the prophets. And if that's true and it's alive and it's adaptable, then it should be able to integrate current findings, from science, from the field, the various different fields of science, into the word. And I'll go into that as we go on through this series. I'll be integrating a lot of different theories and archaeological finds, geological finds, things of that nature into the Bible itself, even with that of Exodus and earlier dating than what we have so far. And so we should be able to constantly adapt, and we're adaptable creatures as well, especially if you look at it from an evolutionary perspective. And not just evolutionary, but even psychologically on the developmental stages from childhood to adulthood. You look at how we develop and stuff. We're very highly adaptable creatures, and we adapt to new material. We should. Otherwise, what you're doing is you're in complete denial, which we'll get into here shortly, of new information. People can close themselves off so much that they never grow, never transform, never do anything. And they stay within this consistent loop, positive feedback loop, where they, stay within their confines and they never branch out beyond that, because it'll interrupt their current knowledge structure, and that's painful. But anything that's worth having is painful. I mean, if you exercise, it's painful, but you're getting benefit from it, and it's transforming you literally, physically. And so you can decide, most people don't want to do that anymore. We just want to sit around and do absolutely nothing. I understand, because I do it too, especially after kids and work and everything, school and everything else. You're like, okay, maybe I do just want to sit here just for a second and relax. And as soon as you sit down, one of the kids hits somebody or something happens, they're screaming in the house, and, quote unquote, all hell breaks loose in the house, and you're trying to contain it once more, and you think you can rest again. You might as well not. You might as well just stand there and sip on another cup of coffee at 8 o'clock in the evening, because you're going to have more trouble ahead of you. So, but anyway, so Philippians chapter 4, verses 8 through 9. Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue, and if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. These things which you learned and received and heard and saw in me, these do, and the God of peace will be with you. Meditate on these things, study these things, try to understand these things. But yet, the interesting part on that is the word true up there in Allah Thes, I think I'm pronouncing it right, which literally means true, factual. So you want to meditate on whatever things are factual. Look at these things, try to make sense of them, see how it works. And meditate is something much deeper than just learning the material. That's just comprehension. It's also being able to see how that material fits into your own current knowledge structure, your own interpretation of reality as such. And reality encompassing the Bible and your beliefs, everything, and trying to make sense of that. And you can, oftentimes people can comprehend and memorize facts, but to actually integrate that into your knowledge structure is a very difficult process. It takes a lot of work, and it's transferring from the right hemisphere, that's where the information comes in through, the right hemisphere, to the left, back over to the right. And that's the way it should do. So you're constantly trying to formulate, and you're wrestling with these ideas, this new knowledge that you just incorporated, that you just retrieved, I would say. Okay. Constant adaptability. We find this in Buddhism. This is one of the things that I do appreciate of Buddhism. And there's a lot of parallel between that of Christianity. I just believe Christianity there's truth in Buddhism, and there's a lot of parallel with that of Christianity. I just think Christianity is the actual complete whole truth found within Christ. And more as we go along this series, I'll present that evidence and make the case for it. But A lot of the parallel, the yin yang symbol, which is the balance between chaos and order, potential and actuality, and you have the middle path, and you see it has a serpent-like pattern there. That's the process of adaptation between these two as they manifest themselves to you in reality. You have information, new information, old information, all kinds of things constantly manifest as you move about in reality, and you're constantly seeking to adapt to those manifestations and this changing manifestation. And Christ is really interesting because Christ and the apostles, especially that Paul, was talking about the same thing. In all things be balanced. The word temperate, but that word is actually better translated as balance. It's a middle way of being balanced in life, not veering over into one extreme or the other, but constantly seeking to have balance. And it's a very difficult thing to do. That's for sure. That's why a lot of people do end up finding comfort in structures, whether it be on the left or the right spectrum of thought. People want to have something that anchors them in, and and it's a lot easier just to follow and to be anchored in with the mass than it is as an individual. But Christ was our perfect representation, and he branched from that mass, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and showed and had his own root foundation of interpretation, I would say. And so it's a constant adaptability between chaos and order as they manifest themselves. Chaos representing that of, well, as I said, potentiality, but that of newness, novelty. Novel has novel ideas and information present themselves to you as you're studying difficult texts or difficult books and things of that nature. That's new information. That's chaos. That's potential. And then you seek to how to integrate that into the order aspect of your being, the structure in your left hemisphere, and that guides your perceptions. We'll get into that here in a second. So, oh man, they'll tell us to just take the passage word for it. We are, yes, exactly, Joe. Yes, exactly. Great scripture Jews. Michael says, I notice the scriptures don't tell us to take the passage word for it. We're to be brains, brain. Yeah, it's supposed to be brains. I think you're just putting on there, or maybe brains. Maybe I search the scripture to see if it is so. Exactly. No, and that goes back with the wrestling with God idea too. Is wrestling with ourselves, contending with ourselves, with reality, and with our current knowledge structure, and in the new information that presents itself. And it's the same thing found whenever Paul says that to work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. It's up to us to seek out the knowledge and to integrate that. And it's good to listen to other people. That's for sure. That's a source of information, but that's not the only source. And so we should be studying ourselves, reading difficult books. Not just, like I said, the problem with the modern day church I have is the fact that people I see all the time sharing different books about, be stronger. I mean, those are good. I'm not condemned, but it's like, that's all I ever see. It's like, man, pick up a hard book, pick up a Carl Jung book, pick up a science book, pick something up and take your time with it and see and really try to study it. And you'll have questions come up, and then you either seek out those answers for yourself or you begin to ask around. Those are resources that we have. We have each other as resources, and we can feed off of each other. And, that's what it's about. That's growing together. If we're all doing that and we're all seeking information, we're all communicating back and forth, man, how powerful the church could actually be. Now it's like, well, we're just going to entice people with fog machines and lights. It's like, yeah, you're going to get people. They're not going to be the people you're looking for, though. The atheists are just going to laugh at you for doing such a thing. We need Christian apologetic classes. We need things that are going to truly attract the opposition, people that are truly lost into the church. And then, man, they ask tough questions. Hey, I don't have all the answers. You can ask me whatever question you want. And then I'll go back and do my research, see how that fits. And sometimes we're not going to have all the answers. The atheists don't have all the answers. That's so funny because I ask them stuff all the time. Well, I don't know. We don't know just yet. I'm like, okay, but you're so sure already, even though you don't know. And so you have faith. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. I can say that. Referencing the book of Frank Turek and Norman Geisler. It's like, I don't have enough faith. There's not enough evidence to support the case for atheism. I like to always make the joke, tell a joke to people that I'd be more apt to believe that we're living in a simulation that's controlled by highly intelligent aliens than I would an atheistic universe. Atheistic universe is just logically, literally makes no sense, and there's not enough evidence to support the case whatsoever. So I'd be more on the side of New Ageism or alien species controlling unit than I would an atheistic universe created out of nothing. Just there's just no evidence for it. But once you actually narrow it down and start looking at the evidence, it leads you to Christ every time. So I've done it multiple different ways. But anyway, so we have dual hemispheres of the brain. We have Iain Mcgilchrist, a neuropsychologist, and he wrote The Master and His Emissary, as well as other books. Great reads. I'm actually in the middle of reading The Master and His Emissary. I've watched several different of his lectures and things like that. It's wonderful work that he does. And it's very interesting, the science behind what he's talking about. And he is not a Christian. He's not, this is all scientifically based. I generally do not. I do a little bit of stuff on the Christian side, especially on the Christian apologetic side. Some of the works of them, like Frank Turek and Norman Geisler, but I like to look at the scientific realm. I think it makes a strong case whenever you reference to people as such, especially when you're in debates with atheists or it's like, well, this has nothing to do with Christianity. This is scientifically verified. So how do you combat that exactly? Because it maps right on to Christianity. And oh, well, it makes a much stronger case. But anyways, he does a wonderful job. Very difficult book, a very difficult work. But it's amazing. It's enlightened me. I know that on understanding. It's remarkable. So there's two ways in which we attend to the world. The left hemisphere of our brains apprehends the world. It seeks to manipulate the world and to force ideals and force our models onto the world. So it creates models. It creates frameworks in which we move and have our being. And both are essential. It's not that, well, one's better than the other necessarily. It's that they're both essential, but there are two different ways in which we view the world. We perceive reality. And it's obsessed with fantasies. And it creates fantasies within those models that it has. And it's based on precision. So whenever, for example, whenever a bird is flying over seeking to get its prey on the ground, it's actually using the left hemisphere. It's based on precision. Aim, boom, get. Now, whenever it's actually flying around looking for food and it's kind of scouring, it's actually using the right hemisphere. It's using the peripheral vision that's tied in with the right hemisphere, and it looks about, and then once it catches something, then boom, the left hemisphere takes over. It's precise aim, goes down, grabs the food, eats, and that's how it works. And we're the same way. The left side is precision, aim, goal oriented. It likes looking at parts of things. It takes things out of context, and so it has its utility, and it literally is predicated upon utilizing things. Tool making, for one, is kind of where that came from. As we made tools, evolutionarily speaking, that was done through the left hemisphere. And so it has a lot of survival tactics within it. And so, yes, takes things out of context. Schizophrenia is actually related to the overactivation of the left hemisphere. And unfortunately, and languages, spoken language is housed within the left hemisphere, but emotions and empathy are actually housed in the right hemisphere. So schizophrenia, oftentimes those that suffer from schizophrenia that are schizophrenic or lack empathy, they lack emotional connection with other people. And so, and what's fascinating is his work. He points out the fact that as far as he can tell, that's exactly kind of what's happening in our day and age right now. And technology, for one, is the blame for that. And what's interesting is the study that's been going on for about 3 decades now with college students. They've done, and I've spoken about this before, but they give these questionnaires, these surveys from the 1980s. It rates on narcissism and empathy, and the questions are done to where they're pretty subtle in their assessment, to where they can't really trick the surveys. And And so the students have been taking them, and they were averaging, the average college students at that time were about 70% empathy, 30% narcissism. And then now in our day and age, here recently, the test results have completely flipped to where it's about 70% narcissism, 30% empathy. So we're becoming much more left hemisphere active than we are right hemisphere. And as far as some of the driving forces behind that could be the very essence of our technology and our phone use, because we use more of the left hemisphere whenever we're precisely doing things on our phone. That's one. There's a bunch of different reasons for it, but unfortunately what happens too is, like I said, it's unempathetic. It's emotionally disconnected from other people compared to the right hemisphere. And what it does is it dehumanizes people and looks at them as objects rather than actual subjects. And it's very interesting. And you look at how people treat people now, especially on the younger side of things. And like I said, with that study, college students today compared to college students just 3 decades ago has dramatically shifted in empathy and narcissism. And so people are becoming possessed by ideologies that are predicated upon, rooted in resentments, which we'll get into here shortly with that of Marxism predominantly, and resentment and retaliation. And so it's pretty remarkable what is happening. He points that out quite a bit in the book. The right hemisphere attends to the world as it is. So it perceives the world as it is and doesn't try to impose any structure onto it, any model. The left hemisphere does. That's why the right hemisphere is so well at retrieving new information, receiving and retrieving new information. Children are very high in right hemisphere activation as they're developing. That's why they're like little sponges and they soak up information. What's fascinating, and whenever I learned this, I began to instantly think about what Christ was talking about, how we have to become childlike. And I'm talking about in one of my most recent videos, is the fact that, what he meant by that exactly. Why did he say that? It can't be in reference to maturity. That's for sure. It cannot be in reference to maturity, because even Paul says, you got to mature. You got to get to the meat of the word. There has to be spiritual maturity. So it can't be that, although some of the Christian church, as far as I can tell, has taken it as such, because you see a lot of immaturity within a lot of the Christian church, even on the pastor side, unfortunately. But to connect, quote unquote, with the younger generation, but I don't think that works very well. I don't think that's what they're looking for. They're not looking for a buddy. They're looking for a leader. They're looking for someone that can give them answers. That's more or less what it's on. But anyways, he was talking about becoming childlike. And I think that, like I said, the word is living. And I think as we have better understood our brains now, the complexity of the brain, the workings of the brain, we can map that right on. And it's like, maybe that's exactly what Christ is talking about, becoming childlike, to where you're taking in new information and not just guiding yourself off your model, the structure you built this house in the left hemisphere. That's exactly what the Pharisees were doing. And he, condemned the Pharisees for doing such things. Same thing with Sadducees on, but from a progressive standpoint. And so he condemned that. And he was talking about too, no, I get into that later. I'm not even going to get into that right now. So anyways, it attends to the world, takes in information, and is okay with ambiguity. It's imagination, not fantasy necessarily. It's two different things. Creativity is how it's more on the right than it is the left. The left is more fantasy imposed, where it creates a story rather than allowing creativity to flow like it does in the right hemisphere. And it looks at depth and the whole of the context. This is a very crucial aspect here too, with especially in modern day society, is the fact that, so the left hemisphere looks at black and white only. It looks at it sees only two-dimensional. It's very fascinating work. It sees two-dimensional, while the right hemisphere actually looks at the depth. It can actually see three-dimensional objects. It perceives depth, and it sees people as individuals. It doesn't see them as objects. It sees the whole of the context. It's a very important aspect of it as well. It's the fact that we take things out of context more now than we ever have before, as we continue to be overactive in the left hemisphere. And You see this all the time. You see this in science. You see this in philosophy. You see this in, of course, Christianity. You see them take things, verses out of context. I've had so many discussions and debates with people on different verses of the Bible. Well, you see this is, God's a reprehensible creature for allowing this. I'm like, you just took that. Okay, let's look at it in the context in which it's written. Then now look at it in the context of the whole of the Bible. And then, and like I said, there's different levels of analysis. So you look at that, and then you look at that, and then look at the original language. Now look at the historical context it's written in. Now look at the whole of the context of the universe and the working of the universe. Now, and it keeps going. There's various different levels of analysis. And you have to look at the whole of the context. Scientists do the same thing. Different atheists. Oh, well, this. I'm like, you're not looking at the whole of the context. Just like with the universe. Well, how do you know there's only one universe? How do you know there's not multiple dimensions that encompass this universe? So we're starting to figure out that maybe there is. I mean, the most prominent theory within physics right now is string theory, which has an add-on of 26 different dimensions. It's like, well, that's speaking the language of the Bible. First off, everything seen is made of things that are unseen. God lives in the heavenly realm, whatever that means exactly. It appears as though it's a higher dimensional realm. Dark matter itself appears to be something potentially of a higher dimensional realm itself, as it acts upon our world, upon our universe, and literally keeps everything intact. And it actually forms and puts a hold on the galaxies themselves. Without that, everything would fling apart and it wouldn't even be operational. So dark matter is essential to the existence of the universe and the structure of the galaxies. Gravity is not strong enough force to be able to manage that. And they think, well, maybe that's a higher dimensional realm acting and holding everything together. Well, I mean, these are echoing what the Bible's talking about. And so now we're discovering these things. Now we can take that and integrate that into our interpretation and go, wow, man, it's speaking even more volumes than what it was before. But you got to look at the whole of the context. And so whenever these people are, especially on the literal side and the traditionalists, whenever you're taking things and you're like, well, you're going outside the Bible. Well, you have to in order to understand the whole of the context of what's going on. Otherwise, you're just within your narrow scope. That's a left hemisphere dominant trait that you're exhibiting. You have to get outside of that in order to see the whole of the context of what God is meaning by certain things. So it's much deeper than that. But yeah, it's okay with vagueness. And I think, that's an essential part too. I like to tell people. Oftentimes really intelligent people with high IQ, one of the traits is the acceptance of vagueness, to be able to ambiguity, to be able to, things being ambiguous and being okay with not knowing every little detail, not knowing everything. That one thing that keeps it interesting. I don't think we were designed to know everything. Only God knows everything. And so we're creatures of with exploratory natures embedded right into us, biologically, down to the genetic level. I mean, our ancestors went out and, especially the intelligent, there's a theory on that as far as branching out of Africa, that the higher intelligence, because people that are higher intelligent seek out novelty, new information, new experiences, and that the ones that actually branched out and began to explore were higher intelligent people. And so it's built right into us, and they're the ones that more than likely survived more than the lower IQ people, because they stayed back, became stagnant, began to interbreed and disappear. But so it's built right into our being, our genetic makeup, to want to seek out new information and new adventures in life, new experiences. And I mean, what's more exciting than, like, not having all the answers, and as new scientific discoveries are made, and then you try to figure that out, and I know I always get a thrill out of, like, wow, I just mapped that all, wow, this works, and it all connects, and it's starting to make this beautiful picture, overarching picture. And that's the right hemisphere at work. It's looking at the whole of the context, the whole picture. The same, the left hemisphere, when looking at the right and left hemisphere in comparison to looking at a work of art, for instance, right hemisphere will look at the whole of what's being, drawn out there, and look at the symbolism behind what the artist is trying to portray, while the left hemisphere will actually look at the parts and look at various elements. It cannot see the whole of the content. Very interesting. So there's been work, we'll start narrowing down here. Again, we've been on here a long time. is the fact with stroke patients. So patients that have had strokes in the right hemisphere, and so they have their left hemisphere that's mostly operational. Whenever asked to draw pictures, they will only draw half of the picture of an object. They'll only draw half of it. Um, Whenever they're walking down the street, they can only see one side of, which is the right side. They can only see the right side of the street. And then when they turn around, they can only see that side of the street. So the left hemisphere, the left, and this is where I get at here in a second, the whole left part of the world existence is completely not there. It's very, very interesting. Um, and you see this with right hemisphere stroke patients. Their left arms don't work because the right controls the left one, the left controls the right. Is that they're in complete denial. Even if you tell them, "Hey, your hand is there. That's your hand," they'll deny that that's their hand. No, that's my mom left it there when she came to visit me at the hospital. I mean, weird things of that nature. No, also they have this. I'm trying to remember exactly what it is. I think it's a. I could be correct, incorrect here. I think it's electromagnetic shock. I think, if I'm not mistaken, where they actually can temporarily activate the right hemisphere from these right hemisphere stroke patients, and it's like such a drastic shock. They can feel their left arm again. They can not only feel it, but can tell that it's really there, and it completely wipes them out for a little while. They're in utter shock. It dismantles their knowledge structures housed in the left hemisphere. It completely dismantles them, puts them in the shock, state of shock. And then after that wears off, they'll go right back into a state of denial. Oh, that's not my arm. I don't know whose arm that they left it here when they came to visit or whatever it may be. The whole left perception of reality is gone. And so it's absolutely amazing. Now, on the other end, left hemisphere stroke patients, they lose the ability for language, but they can still perceive the whole of the context because they still have the right hemisphere. So right hemisphere is very important, and they're both very important to be able to see the whole of the picture. Make sense of it all, because left hemisphere helps us break things apart and that make up the whole. Then that's where that crucial aspect of having knowledge come into the right, go into the left, you're breaking it apart, and then you go back into the right again to make the whole picture of what it is that you're trying to understand. But that takes contending. That takes meditation, quote unquote, of the material at hand and the thoughts and ideas that come up. And it's very interesting because subatomic reality echoes the nature of the dual hemisphere, wave function and particle, as I was talking about earlier, potential and actuality. The right hemisphere being more akin to that, to a certain symbolizing, I would say that of the wave function. And so particles are both a wave and a particle at the same time, quote unquote. And it's only through the conscious observation. And so through the observation of a conscious observer, conscious being, that activates it into a particle, into actuality. So everything that we see, touch, feel is made of particle, and it's all. Now, wave function is potential. It's just it's pretty much non-existence to a certain degree. There's nothing there. It's through our observation that actually causes particles to manifest, and reality manifests as is. And so you could say that the wave function represents the right hemisphere to a certain extent. Same thing with the yin yang symbol that I was talking about earlier, and then the particle structure being that of the structure of reality, stability within the left hemisphere. And so, okay. So the left hemisphere model says, but each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. And that Greek word is epithemia, which is desire, craving, longing, a lust after. And of course, theologically, we can go, well, sin, but at the same time, our left hemisphere goes for what it sees that it can utilize for its own benefit. That's what it does. And it goes after, like I said, it aims and it goes after and tries to utilize whatever it is that it's trying to utilize. And it seeks its own benefit, and it loves its own constructs as well. And so the desire that's embedded within that left hemisphere can drive us. And I'm just trying to, constructed models drive our behavior in the world and our perception as such. Like I said, as we form these models in our left hemisphere, then we perceive the world. We map that on and we try to make sense of that. And it helps us navigate through the world. So it is important for these structures, but we need to constantly be updating these structures. The structures in our left hemisphere do not need to become stagnant. And I think that's what has happened in the Christian church. Science has advanced and atheism has taken a hold of all that, and Christianity has kind of done nothing with it and kept within the realm of its own comfort within the religious sphere. But it's done no good. As we've seen the decline of Christianity from, well, beginning in 2000, it dropped below 70% for the first time in recorded American history from its beginning. I think it was 1920 or maybe 1910. It began a survey of that. And it's always maintained above 70% all the way until the year 2000. Then it has declined drastically since then. Now we're below 50% for the first time ever. And each subsequent, and that's the totality of the population, each subsequent generation, following generation, is lower and lower. I think the Generation Z was like below 30% or something of that nature, and right at 30% claim, make the claim of Christianity. And so we're apparently doing something very wrong, I think, in the Christian church. And I think if you were going to look at it within the spiritual realm, you say, well, the devil's at work. It's like, yeah, what are we going to do to contend with that? Not do fog machines and lights. We need to be doing something that they're truly hungering after. Because especially if you look at atheism and even New Ageism, they're seeking something else. They're seeking seeking something else that they're not finding in religion. Like I said, in the dogmatization of the belief system of Christianity, not Christianity in and of itself. It's the interpretations thereof, and then the structure and systematization of what we have created beginning with the Roman Catholic Church. That's where it really began. And, prior to that, it was people meeting in homes. Even Christ himself said, you won't be worshiping in this temple. You'll be on the mountaintops and worshiping God in the spirit. And where 2 or 3 are gathered together, there I am among them. And what does that mean? It means that where we're discussing Christ, this is church. This right here is church in and of itself. And so, and it's always good, of course, to be in each other's company. It's better than online, that's for sure. But you only do so much with that. But that, anyway, so right hemisphere activation, looking at a couple verses. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about its own things. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble, which is actually a right hemisphere trait. Very interesting. It's okay with the vagueness of reality. And one of the left hemisphere is constantly seeking to impose a structure and to survive and to, apprehend the world. And so then, said, surely I say to you, unless you are converted and become as little children, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So as I spoke about earlier, the idea is of activating the right hemisphere by engaging with new content and looking at it, not coming in. The right hemisphere doesn't come in with, what's preconceived ideas. It comes in to a certain degree with a blank slate and reads the material as it is, and then begins to process it as it goes over into the left hemisphere and interacts with that knowledge structure that we have built in. And you're interacting and you're seeing how that correlates with each other. Fortunately, I do it quite a bit now. It's hard for me I read text, and I mean, within one page, I'm already analyzing, especially depending on what I'm reading. But I already start analyzing, correlating, and I have to shut my brain off. I'm like, okay, just read. Why don't you? Instead of analyzing every little sentence. Maybe that's a little too left hemisphere going on, a little too much left hemisphere action. Spirit of truth, lead us into all truth, but the Spirit of the Lord is there's liberty. We all work through the faith of creation with the Logos. It's God, it's the one of God. Which, amen, So attending to the world and the information therein with an open mind, seeking to dialogue with what is presented to us. And that's a very interesting thing about reality as it is. We're constantly in dialogue. As I said, we're constantly communicating with reality, and we're not even aware of us doing it. And it's only through the conscious observation of reality that it manifests. It's actually communicating with us on the subatomic structure. I know it's difficult. People are like, do what? But no, seriously, the particles know when we're observing, it's interacting with us constantly. It's communicating with us. And so as we move, we're communicating with reality, and it's unfolding and manifesting itself. And it's very interesting. And so that's why I'm like, an idea of an atheistic universe just doesn't make any sense. I mean, this thing is intelligent, conscious, and it communicates. It's sociable, just like us. And so you would think a higher intelligent being that's conscious, that is sociable, that seeks to communicate, would create something as this. Okay, so now we're finally over into the into the formation of ideas that have really influenced the 20th and 21st century, and how powerful ideas can be, and what influence they have and impact on society and on the world that they do have. Beginning with Karl Marx, we're going to look at three different ones. We've kind of already looked at Christ. We'll look at these three and then kind of conclude conclude this lecture deal here. An hour and a half. Again, I do appreciate you guys staying on this long, and yeah. So Karl Marx, born March 5th, 1818 in Trier, Germany. He wrote the Communist Manifesto, collective ideas and theories known as Marxism, critical theories, working class, proletariat, and the ruling class is bourgeoisie. I can't even pronounce it correctly. Bourgeoisie, or whatever he says. Anyway, I struggle with that, but I did not do enough research on that word here recently to be able to pronounce it correctly. Just like the Greek word, I've always struggled with pronunciation, and it's in my head. I can say it, but then I struggle getting it out sometimes, and it may be rooted in not being able to hear very well. But I don't know. Anyways, or maybe I'm just dumb. I don't know. But so ideas are what fueled the Soviet Union. These ideas are exactly what fueled Soviet Union, Mao, China, and even modern day feminism. People don't realize this is a branch of the critical theory proposed by Marxism. It's a branch off of that. It's all rooted in resentment, retaliation. You speak to people that are Marxists, and it's like, well, the rich have all the power. It's like, well, yeah, how did they get there though? I mean, I'm not talking now. Of course, if we're going to get into our conspiracy side of, well, the ultra rich, and I get all that, and oftentimes that's even what they mean. They're not even thinking straight. But most of these people that you deem as rich are not really rich necessarily. They're wealthy for the most part, but they've worked and labored hard and came from nothing oftentimes and produced something. And then, well, now you're resentful because, I work hard too. I'm a bricklayer and I work hard. And I'll never forget this, having a conversation years ago with a guy over in California about that. And he was like, well, I work hard. I'm a bricklayer, and I work hard every day. And, these guys have all this money. I said, yeah, but first off, they worked hard to build that up. They were probably a bricklayer themselves at one time. And they went ahead and took the risk, built this business, gave you a job. And then while you go home, you get your check each week, you go home, you work your 40, 50, 60 hours, whatever it is that you work, and you do your deal. They're over there stressing how they're going to not only pay for their family, bills, all these different things, but keep their business afloat, make sure taxes aren't so high that it drains their business and makes their business obsolete, what we're dealing with now, unfortunately, and inflation, but also be able to figure out how they're going to pay you next week, how they're going to keep things. There's so much other added stress. It's like, are you sure you want that? People are like, oh, I wish I had my business like that. It's like, are you sure? Are you sure? I mean, the same thing on the intelligence side I was saying before. People are jealous. They're like, oh, well, these people are high IQ. I wish I was that smart. It's like, are you sure you wish you're that smart? Do you know what's all the responsibility that's entailed within that? It's like people that are high IQ oftentimes stress so much more and are depressed and anxious more so than normal people because they're constantly thinking all the time, and they're thinking about deep things, and then they have to formulate these things, and they got to make sure that it's coherent, because then they have the pressure that because they are smart that they got to constantly perform all the time. It's like there is a lot more to it. It's not just that simple and straightforward. Well, if everybody was smart, we may have a problem at the end of the day. We don't know. And then at that point, if everybody's that smart, and then it would raise the bar even more. I mean, they're just, same thing with economics. I mean, if everybody was rich, it's like, well, if everybody's rich, well, then inflation would be through the roof, and then you'd all equally be poor, and then there would still only be a few at the top, and so it's and then that's just a natural law. It's a Pareto distribution. It's also called the Matthew principle, where people that have will be given more, and people that do not have are given less, or that which they do have will be taken from them. And it's interesting because it's you look at some of the people as simple as what's his name, Stephen King. He sells the vast majority of fiction books. The wealth of them, like 90% or some crazy number of that sort. And then you got a few others that sell a little bit below, or quite a bit below him, but they're doing pretty good. And then you have like 95% or 98% of the writers that sell little to nothing. And then you have like 90% that literally sell nothing at all. It's like, okay, it's a natural law literally built in that, you'll have these great writers, these great things, and these people that do certain things, and it falls into play, and they worked hard and they worked smart, and things connected, and it worked out for them. And then once it did work out for them, it's like a flood, and it just keeps rolling, because the more resources you have, then the more resources you have, then the more research, and it just builds on top of each other. And it's a snowball effect and goes on. And so, don't get me wrong, there's some truth to what they're saying, but a lot of the truth of what they're talking about too is also rooted within the ideas of conspiracy, that the elites are owning everything, and they do. You look at some of the stuff that they have, like BlackRock and Vanguard and things of that nature, owning everything. It's like, yeah, man, we got a problem, but you know what? You're never going to get those people. When the raise taxes and stuff are going to actually affect the smaller people that have come from nothing, and the other people that you're actually talking about, the elites of the world, the Walton families, all this and that, are going to be untouched, because they're the ones ruling the world anyways. So, you're kind of working against yourself. But yeah, Soviet Union, Gulag Archipelago, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, a very good book. Read some of it. I'm trying to read. It's a very long book, and they've broken it up into 3 volumes now. And it's estimated around anywhere from 30 to 50 million people died in the Gulag concentration camps, as well as other catastrophes like the starvation of 6 million Ukrainians, and in Ukraine. It was a devastating factor, and you don't even hear about this in school. You hear about the Nazi Germany's, but Nazi Germany and 6 million Jews that died, and it's terrible. But this is around 30 to 50 million, and there are some estimations for Mao's China, anywhere from 50 to 100 million people died from starvation, from torture and to death, all kinds of stuff in concentration camp. And so it had negative consequences. Time and time again, you have Cambodia, you have all kinds. Anytime you see the ideas of communism, that power that is behind ideas that dictate the behaviors and actions of individuals, policyholders, in all of that that's constituted within that, has drastic effects. So we need to be careful about what ideas we are harvesting. I would say creating, harvesting, and choosing to believe in, that guide our actions. And it's a very tricky deal. So Friedrich Nietzsche, much people don't like him. He is a very brilliant man, and like I said, his issue was more with dogmatic Christianity than it was with I would say Christianity in and of itself. But he was an atheist to a certain extent. German philosopher, October 15, 1844. He actually did a wonderful job of predicting the catastrophes of the 20th century due to pure rationalism, which again is a left hemisphere trait. So it's very interesting. Rationalism, systemized, not necessarily logical, just systematized. I forgot to go into that. I know we're getting near the end here, but one of the interesting things with the left hemisphere is that it's not necessarily logical, it's systematized. So they've done tests where they could dampen the left and right hemisphere. I think it may have been the electromagnetic stimulation, or I cannot remember. Cranial magnetic dampening or something of that sort. I can't remember exactly what it was, but they can dampen the activation of either or hemisphere. And so what they've done is they dampen the left and they dampen the right, and they gave them these order to test logic, and they said one of the deals that they done was tropical islands, winters in tropical islands are cold. Hawaii is a tropical island, therefore winters in Hawaii are cold, and the right hemisphere, the left hemisphere dampening with the right hemisphere activated, said, well, that can't be true because winters in tropical islands are cold. The left hemisphere said no. Whenever they dampen the right hemisphere and is only solely the left hemisphere, said no, that's correct, because it follows systematically, not necessarily logically. It's systematic. It's a systematization. It's okay, that's true because A, B, C. It's not necessarily true that it's actually factual. It's just true because it's in that systematic order. So it's rational. Pure rationalism is not the way to go. That's too much of the left hemisphere. And like I said, and at the same time, going back to the either or deal that I just stated, it's not either or, it's and both at the same time. Same in the thing I was talking about earlier, that it's Christianity and science at the same time. It's both of these things. We need to be looking at the adaptability of both the chaos and order paradigm that we're dealt with, economy that we're dealt with constantly in reality. It's, because just like with the particle, the subatomic structure of reality is and both. It's both at the same time. And so we need to be looking at it. It's not either or, it's and both. And we need to be looking at it as such and trying to figure out how all that meshes together like a piece of puzzle. Friedrich Nietzsche is also one that coined the term that God is dead. He's famous for that. Atheists herald that as something great, but he didn't at all, actually. He saw it as a catastrophe. He said God, and he was talking about religion in Europe predominantly, that it had died. And it said, God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this death too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? And he was pretty much talking about a Superman that would have to come along to create a moral code, because morality has been wiped away and introduced with the death of God, death of dogmatic Christianity in Europe would emerge nihilism and pure, rooted in pure rationalism. And that's exactly what we saw happen in the 20th century. And we're even seeing the aftermath with the postmodernists now. It's rooted all in nihilism, nihilistic belief that anything and everything goes, and we should just, and they use the term love, like they know what they're talking about. That wears me out more than anything else. They're talking about an emotional type of love. It's not a true objective love, I would say. Objective love, what I mean is, empirically we can see on the parenting side, for instance, that the best parenting style from what we've seen through observation is you can't be too restrictive for your children, too disciplinary, and you cannot be too liberal with your parents, with your children either. You have to actually have a nice balance in order to produce a proper child development. And then this is, these are studies that have been conducted. That's what they have found, is that the ones that are too disciplinary, mostly found predominantly in Asian countries like China and Japan, things of that nature, produce adult children, children that go on into adulthood that have higher rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide. Same thing on the too liberal side. If you're too liberal with your children, just like we see with the left now, with all allowing your children to choose what gender, even though they understand anything at all, you have to guide your children. And so they showed that children that grow up like that are the same thing as pretty much reflect each other on the disciplinary side as it does on the liberal side. And so they found that the best way of parenting was that of setting somewhat of perimeters and then allowing your children to explore within those perimeters, and then broadening those perimeters as time goes on. So back to the adaptability idea I was talking about before, constantly allowing them to adapt, and you adapt with them to know, okay, well, they need broader borders now to be able to explore a little further. And so you keep doing that as time goes on. That takes conscious parenting, though, that's for sure. And I think what happens too is either on the disciplinary side or the liberal side, you end up getting to the point where you become lazy and you're like, well, I'll just give them a bunch of rules and that'll contain them. And then on the liberal side, it's like, well, I don't want to have to do anything, so I'll just let them do whatever they want. That way it just frees me up. So on both, it's kind of like, well, you're very apathetic and lazy. And so, it takes a lot of work on the middle ground. And that's going back to the whole idea of balance and adaptability, even within the Christian realm. We should be doing the same thing. It's and in both. Again, we're combining and we're constantly contending and wrestling with these ideas. So Carl Jung, Swiss psychologist, July 26, 1875, the collective unconscious and symbolism and the archetype being that of the mythological hero, the ideal being. And he even talks about Christ himself being the ideal being. He didn't believe that Christ was an actual, the coming Messiah or anything of that sort, or even, I don't even think he believed he was a historical figure, but he does believe that he was, the story of Christ is the ideal representation. It's a representation of the ideal. And so the ideal human being, and that he did acknowledge that. He thinks that really it took a lot of work of constructing. It was really a story put together of construction. And he, relates it to the stories of the virgin births that are found throughout mythology, and the same thing of death and resurrection that are found in ancient mythology that predate Christianity. But again, I'll go into that later on as we get through the series, that those stories do not hold water in comparison to the story of Christ at all. Like there's little to no comparison whatsoever. So to think that they stole from the stories is like, no, doesn't seem right at all. Not including the fact that we have plenty of evidence to support the case for a historical Christ. But anyways, he did do great work with symbolism and looking at the collective unconscious works embedded within mythology. And if you look at a bunch of different mythological stories, you can find different parallels and stories that are coming out. I use the example of the St. George story with the prince saving, or the knight saving the princess from the fiery dragon of chaos. And that story is very ancient, and we don't know how ancient, how far back it goes. And it's kind of in that collective unconscious, and people wrote it and wrote different versions of it. And now what's happened with our modern day society is that is being flipped around. It's a reprehensible act to my viewpoint here, and flipped around where women now are seen as the knights and men are the princess, or they're not even in the story whatsoever. And it's, the dragon of chaos is a representation of the hurdles and struggles of women trying to excel in their careers and, divert from motherhood because it's such a terrible thing to engage in. And I mean, it's just absolutely terrible what they're promoting in these movies. I don't even want my daughter and sons watching these films anymore because they flipped the story around. One of them in particular was Crudes, the movie Crudes. I think it may be the second one or something. I sit there and watch one night with them, and I would just, I'd infuriate. I contained that the best I could, but I was like, this is absolute bull hockey right here watching this. I mean, at the end of it, the women go and save the three men from the dragon of chaos. I mean, it was the monkey of chaos, giant monkey emerging out of the abyss. It's the same story that's been told for, God, who knows how long. And, now it's the women doing it. It's like, yeah, you're and what that is. And it has nothing to do with, oh, well, you're just a sexist. And, okay, maybe so, I guess. But that's not the case at all. I have nothing wrong with that, in and of itself. What I know they're doing here is the fact that they're forcing, again, the left hemisphere construct they have housed there. They're imposing that onto the structure of reality and trying to infiltrate the minds of young people to teach them, well, this is the way the world is. And, I'm not just using that as one piece of evidence. It's not like I'm like, well, see, that's something all up. They're trying to do this. Like, no, go ahead and look at any movie in the past, 10 to 15 years, especially children's movie. Name one movie that has a male figure in there that's strong that ends up conquering and doing something great. It's like none of them. The only one that I have observed so far was How to Train Your Dragon, and he was like a little weakling dude. The girl was strong. She's ultimately the hero at the end of the day. And it's like, you see, and I don't want my son watching this, teaching him how he just needs to be this little weak guy, and women will take care of everything. It's like you're trying to flip the script around. It's absolutely reprehensible. I can't stand it. But because I know what they're doing, they're trying to manipulate, and I'm out on that. And Martin Luther, reformer, so another man, reformer in the 14th, 15th centuries, rejected several teachings practiced in the Roman Catholic Church. God's grace was freely given, with the 95 statement of 95 thesis. Yeah, and he, if it wasn't for him, we'd still be part and partial. If it wasn't for him, we'd still be under the theological role of the Roman Catholic Church. It's progressive ideas and thinkers that end up producing results, and this is what we should be doing in our modern day and age. Understanding rooted in facts, and that's exactly what Martin Luther done. That's what we should be doing today. Taking new understandings and seeking to get out of the dogmatic tyranny of dogmatizations of tradition to a certain extent, and integrating new knowledge into it, integrating new information into one's own model, maintaining adaptability, interpreting with new updated perceptual framework. What I mean by new information, updating our perceptual framework in our left hemisphere. We need to constantly seek to update and not to keep it stagnant, because that's what really helps us move in the world quite a bit. And so it needs to be somewhat updated and relevant to the current reality we inhabit, I would say. So a lot of information today. I hope everyone enjoyed it. You can like and share, and we're going to be going through creation and evolution next week. We're going to be going through the first chapter of Genesis as well as the second. I'm going to try to do my best with all of it, mapping it out same way. And so, that's where we're at so far. There's some more things I probably could have gone over, but we'll touch into that as I go along in the series as more ideas come in. It's a lot of information, a lot of things. And it's already been 2 hours at this point. So I really do appreciate you guys staying on for that long. Like and share. If you would like to donate, you can click there's a link down there. There's also a link to Iain Mcgilchrist's book on Amazon. Check that out as well. Thank you all again. I really appreciate it. God bless you all, and have a good week ahead.